Welcome back. I don't know whether or not you saw my most recent puzzle solving video, but I had been hovering at around 2300 as you can see from my ratings graph here, and then there's the big drop off at the end. That was in my last video where I made it to 2317 but then dropped down into the 2200s. And I decided after thinking about this for a while to go back to the beginning and start with the basic puzzles and work my way back up and see if I can do it more steadily this time. And if you don't know how to reset your puzzle rating on chess.com, I am going to show you here in just a second, so stick around. Alright, what you want to do is hover over the settings at the lower left. There's a little gear icon. I don't know how to do this in the app or if it's possible, but here you click on all settings and it'll take you to your profile page, and then you will go to puzzles, which is right here, and one of the options is to reset rated training history. So I'm going to click that. Are you sure you want to reset your tactics, ratings, and stats? Yes. So I click that, and it says your rating and history have been reset successfully. So now when I go to the puzzles page, it should show a pretty low rating, and let's see what it says. All right, it does say 400, so now we're going to solve some puzzles. Okay, this is a basic endgame puzzle, and I think there is a checkmate here, and it's going to be rook to the back rank, and then when the king is forced to move to the side, we're going to go over here. This rook is going to block, and then we're going to capture it. Okay, first puzzle solved. It said doubled rook. I don't think our rooks were doubled, but I'm not going to worry about the themes. I'm just going to keep this video as short as possible and work on the checkmates. We're playing with the black pieces. Here we have a checkmate here. The knight will block, and then we will capture. The king cannot escape this way because of our knight. Okay, and as you will see if you're going to follow along in this video, the lower rated puzzles are almost always checkmates, but every now and then they're going to be simple moving out of check or capturing a free piece. In this case, it looks like it's going to be just taking a piece. I don't see anything else. Like, for example, we don't have any good checks in this position. We can't check there. We can't, knights don't move that way, so we can't check. So I am pretty sure it's just going to be taking a free piece. But I don't, we'll find out. Okay. Next puzzle. Do you think that's checkmate? Okay. After you've been solving puzzles for a while, you will see that there are just some fairly simple patterns here, and also knowing in advance that the opponent's first move is going to be very often a blunder, or whatever the move was, it's a move that leaves you with the advantage. For example, here our opponent should have done something else. I'm not sure exactly what they should have done, but here this leaves us with an unprotected pawn, which is check. The only opponent piece that can block is the knight, which we can then just capture, and the king will be forced to the side, and we will move here, which will be mate protected by our knight. Okay, and you'll see I'm getting more points for these than I normally do because we're solving them within the time frame. That one had a target time of 41 seconds, and we solved it in less than that, apparently. Okay, next puzzle. This one also looks like, since we are not in check, our opponent probably should have checked us there or done something different. But I believe this is going to be checkmate because our bishop will protect our queen, and the king's escape squares will all be cut off by our queen. And this bishop, of course, and no other piece can get down there to stop it. Okay. I did not solve that in 13 seconds, probably because I was talking, but still solved it fast enough to get 11 points. Okay. The bishop has taken a piece down here. This one is a fairly simple back rank mate. We just have to check here first to move the king away because the rook guards the back rank right now, but we have two pieces. Once we move our queen to f7, we will have 2 pieces hitting the checkmate square. So once we check here, the opponent's only legal move was to move the king. Now we can check, and when the rook captures, our rook will capture and it will be checkmate. All right. As you can see, we're already doing puzzles rated 648. That one doesn't have a theme, but I said I wasn't going to worry about the themes. That's just habit. Let's go to the next one. Also, don't be surprised if I miss a couple of these, even simple ones. You can miss stuff. This is just checkmate here because our bishop protects that square, and our bishop will guard the getaway square from the king, and it will have nowhere else to go because the rook cuts off the other squares. And 500. Okay. Took us 8 puzzles to go from 400 to 500. Let's see how far we can go. At this level, I do feel a little bit like a teacher rather than a student. This is a 1-move checkmate because our bishop guards that square. And one thing I have been working on, and it will help in the more difficult puzzles, is full board vision. I still don't have this to some extent. In many puzzles, I have missed a bishop or rook in the distance that guards a square. That's a long way to see, and on my screen I have the board's about the board is more than a foot tall, third of a meter if you're not from the United States, and so it takes a while to move my head around and see all the squares. But it is important to look all the way across the board. Okay, here our rook here cuts off this square, these squares from the king, and so I think that will be checkmate because no opponent piece will be able to block, and the king will have nowhere to go because their own pieces block these squares. Okay. Again, the bishop with the queen lined up, and we couldn't have done that before the opponent's last move because their knight was in the way, and their knight was protected by the bishop and that pawn, and so there was no checkmate. But having this battery lined up and ready is important, and the opponent should pay attention to that and not move the knight out of the way. But that's what they did, so they gave us checkmate. All right, again, we're going to look for 1-move checkmates, and both our bishop and our queen hit this square, so that will be checkmate since we are not ourselves in check. Don't be tempted by the free piece here, because checkmate is a better move than capturing a piece. Although I have been known to avoid checkmating sequences when I could capture a free queen. All right, the king has castled in the corner. I don't think we have a checkmate in this position because we cannot check. None of our pieces can check the opponent's king at this time. So we're going to look for something else. I don't think the queen is trapped. Not quite, although it's getting close because our bishop cuts off these squares, our pawn cuts off this square. What could we do to trap that queen? You know what? We can move our bishop right there because our knight is protected by our other bishop, our dark squared bishop, and our knight guards this square. So I think that is going to be the solution here, and they lose their queen for the bishop. Okay. That was a 2-move sequence, so a little bit more difficult than just a free piece like we saw in the first or second, maybe third puzzle. All right, the rook has moved back 1, and we know that that is a blunder, and we also have a back rank checkmate here that the opponent will only be able to block with the rook, which we will then capture, and that's checkmate. Anytime you see the opponent's king trapped behind its own pawns and not close enough to the edge to escape this way, you should be able to checkmate with a rook or queen at this point, as long as the opponent doesn't have, say, a bishop here guarding that square. In this case, they had nothing protecting that square except their rook. They could get in the way. But again, the king wasn't close enough, so we could just take it. All right. Okay, the king is over here. We do have a check that is an unprotected square, but it's not checkmate. The enemy king could just move. Also, our queen is in danger. I think, let's see, once the king moves, we will be able to check back here on b4, and then the king will not be able to go this way because of our light squared bishop, and it will not be able to go this way because of our queen cutting off these squares, so I think it will have to block with the pawn, which we will just capture. And it looks like it will be a mate in 3. I think we can just capture that pawn, and they can't block with anything else. So there was a mate in 3 there. Okay. I guess this could be considered a speed run. Okay, we have a checkmate here because our rook is also protecting that square. In this case, this is a principle of the king wasn't trapped behind pawns because it was close enough to the edge to escape, and it did have a way to escape had it been over here. This was the case of where the king is on the edge of the board. And it's taken a long time to get it cemented into my brain, but if the king is on the edge of the board, and there's a protected square right next to it, that no enemy pieces are defending because no enemy pieces can point that direction, that's going to be checkmate most often. For example, it would have been checkmate if we'd had a pawn here on g6. It would have been checkmate if we had had a knight here on d6, protecting that square, even if the rook wasn't here. Okay. There's probably a name for that. I just don't know what it is. Okay, I do see that our bishop is cutting off 2 important squares from that king. And our pawn is protecting this square, so us capturing this rook in the corner should be checkmate. Okay, took me a second to see that because of the rook pointing at our queen is always intimidating. And it took me a second to see that the pawn was guarding this getaway square. And we also have to notice that the rook is undefended because the king is in the way of the other rook. All right. Oh, it looks like on the previous puzzle we broke 600, so it took us 16 puzzles to break 600. So we're averaging about 8 puzzles per 100 points at this rate. Okay, the king has moved. Our knight is guarded by our pawn. This square is guarded by our pawn. Our knight is cutting off these 2 squares, and this rook is cutting off these 2 squares. So I think this will just be checkmate here, because no opponent piece can block. Also, our rook was guarding that pawn. So the king had nowhere to go. So it takes some practice, and I'm still learning, but we need to be able to see when all the getaway squares are taken away from the king, and that we have a check which will cement the king in place. It's also important to note that this square was undefended. There wasn't an enemy bishop here, for example, that could have captured us, or I don't know, a light squared bishop here that could have gotten in the way, something like that. Next. Okay, this is a checkmate there because the bishop guards that square. And again, no other opponent piece was attacking that square. So, and the bishop guards the getaway square here, and the rook, of course, cuts off all of these. That's a check, but the king gets out. The king can get out here. But then our other knight can check on e3 and win the queen. I don't know if that's it, because it doesn't look like we're looking at a checkmate pattern here, because our rooks can't get there right now. But a check is almost always the best idea to start with. It's a forcing move. In this case, the king only has 1 legal move. Nothing can block a knight check. And then we will gladly give up that knight. Oh, then when we move this knight, that knight down there will be defended by our rook down here. So then when we check with this other knight, we will win the queen, I think. That's going to be it. Okay. That one was a little harder because it was a 3-move puzzle. You had to see several different things. And you saw I didn't even see this protection until the last second, but I don't think it would have mattered. I think even if this rook were over 1 and was not protecting that knight, I think this still would have been the best move in that position. And let the king have that knight for the queen. Okay, Oh, 666. Look at that. Fortunately, I'm not superstitious. Okay, oh, our queen is in danger, but we have a checkmate down here. All right, this is always one of the reasons why you don't want to move pawns in front of your king if you can avoid it. In this case, our bishop was cutting off all the king's possible escape squares as well as protecting the square that we needed. Now, if this had not been checkmate for some reason, for example, if the queen had been here and able to capture us, that would have been disastrous because if we took back the queen, we would have been checkmated down here because our king cannot escape. But where the queen is could have also checkmated here. So we had to make sure that was checkmate. All right, the queen has captured something. What do we have? Oh, our queen is here. I think we should take it. We take the queen with check. They're going to capture back with their rook, I assume, because otherwise their rook would be left hanging here. They won't be able to do this because that looks like it would be checkmate, but it's not for a couple of reasons. Because one, this is check, so they have to react to that first. And two, our rook is guarded here. And again, if they take back with their king, then we just get this rook for free. But I'm not sure. Should we take the rook first? I think we should take the queen first. I failed my first puzzle in this streak. Okay, I knew that was going to happen at some point. So there was something better. I should have taken my time and calculated that out. Should we have taken the rook first? Because then I thought they would take back with their queen. Also, that's not check, so it's not a forcing move. But the only thing defending that rook is their queen, so if they took back, then what would we have? Oh, their queen is pinned. That's what we had to see, that their queen can't move. So we should have taken the rook first. Okay, I failed to notice the pin. And that's the only way for them to get out of the pin. And then we take their queen. Okay. Because otherwise they were about to lose their queen anyway right here. The only direction they could move the queen was along this diagonal because of the pin. All right, so we learned something. Pin was definitely one of the themes of that puzzle, so I'm going to check mark that. And we will move on. This is not a Puzzle Rush Survivor or Streak, so I'm not worried about if I miss one, it's going to end at some point. I can just keep going. This is another case of a back rank mate that they can only block with a couple of pieces, and then they'll block with the rook, and then that's checkmate. Okay, just had to make sure that that square wasn't protected. Okay. That also does not have a theme. Very interesting. I am noticing that this is cut off and that this is defended, so I think the bishop move down here is checkmate because our rook protects that, and no enemy piece hits that square. Okay. That looks like a mistake because it's just checkmate. I've actually had an opponent play something like that in a game thinking that that was defended, or maybe it was a mouse slip and they meant to bring their rook all the way over here where it would be defended and still guarding the whole back rank. All right, we've cracked 700. So we went from 400 to over 700, and I've lost track of how many puzzles that there were, but there's a bunch of them along that little line. That one also doesn't have a theme. Wow, I'm getting a bunch of puzzles that are apparently new. Okay. That's interesting. I have a checkmate, I think, here. Okay. I just went ahead and moved before explaining it in order to get the points, but the idea here is this time I did see the pin. This pawn is pinned, so and this square is defended by my bishop, so the king couldn't capture the rook. The pawn couldn't capture the rook because that would have also been check. The king couldn't move out of check because my queen is guarding that square. Okay. I'm honestly surprised that I saw that as soon as I did. The theme of that, it says, is past pawns. And I'm sorry, I said I wouldn't worry about themes, but that's incorrect. So we're going to uncheck that. There are past pawns on the board, but that was not the theme of this puzzle. The theme of this puzzle was mate in one. Okay. Next. I don't really have a goal in this video other than to start my progression back up to the higher rankings. Here, I believe we're going to have something down here. Our rook protects that square. Don't know if that's absolutely the best move. I'm going to think about that for a second, because when I capture that, the king has to move over. Yes, then we will check and mate with our rook. Okay, because nothing else protects that square except the rook, so we don't have to worry about our queen. No theme on that puzzle either. Not in check. Look at that. Is that mate? Oh, the king can move over, but then we come down here, and I think that's checkmate. No, the bishop. Oh, but now that. Okay. Forgot that the bishop could block, but that square is protected by our bishop. Okay, that one was a little more difficult. I'm not sure why that was rated 786. I think that one should have been rated 900 or 1,000, somewhere in that range. But it also was a new puzzle that only has a couple thousand, 4,000 attempts, it says, where some of these have 100,000 attempts. So maybe the rating hasn't sorted itself out yet. Or maybe it was easy and it's just something difficult for me to see. I do have a check here. The king cannot escape because of my knight, so it has to go the other way, and I think that will be mate. Oh, it just ended. Okay. The king has to escape here. I don't have anything protecting that square. But once it escapes, then we have mate here on b7, guarded by our knight. Okay. Endgame. They're about to promote, and it's defended. But we have checkmate here. This was another principle I talked about early in the game when the king was on the back rank someplace and we had a protected square in front of it. The same thing applies on the side ranks. If we have a piece defending the needed checkmating square, and we did in this case. And then once our queen is there, protected, our queen cuts off all the other possible escape squares for the king. If this pawn was not here, but a knight, say, was on f5, that still would have worked because the knight guards that square and the queen guards all the getaway squares. Or a bishop over here protecting that square, that sort of thing. Or king here. If our king had been on f3, it still would have worked. Okay. I'm at 23 minutes, and I'm getting close to 800. I think maybe within a 30-minute video I should be able to pass 900, but we'll see. They're getting a little more difficult. That's a check, then the king has to move, and I think that will be made. Because nothing on the enemy side is protecting that square. That's what I had to check for as I was talking. None of these pieces could get to that square because none of them move in those directions. All right, this is being challenged. I think if I move this pawn forward, the king will have no legal squares. It will be checked by the bishop. Okay. Discovered check is something that I have gotten very good, at least for my level. I think I've gotten very good at seeing those when a piece is in the way of an attack. Lots of things I'm not good at yet, but I also saw that the pawns are protecting all of these squares, and the pawns are protecting these squares, and the bishop is protecting that. And, of course, this bishop that I just opened up is guarding all of those squares. All right, next, we have broken 800. We have a checkmate right there. Just had to look for the battery and see that no enemy piece was guarding the square because the king is on the edge of the board. The reason that the edge of the board makes a difference is because they can't go backward. They're limited in the options of squares. Even if no other pieces were nearby protecting those squares and no other pieces were in the way, the king would be extremely limited where it can move when it's on the edge. When a king is in the middle, of course, it has 8 possible squares it can move to. But on the edge, 3 of those possible squares do not exist. So that's one reason that's different than anywhere else. All right. Well, they've just taken our rook. But that's not mate. The king will move, but then we will go there with our knight, and then mate will be back over there, I believe. That's a check, and then that's checkmate. Okay, I've seen that pattern before, which is why I recognized it fairly quickly, that the knight guarded this first square that our queen had to go to, and that the only legal square for the king to move to would be check if we moved our knight here, and then it had to go there where the knight guarded that square. All right. Continuing on. Ooh, that's checkmate. All right. Also a pattern that I've learned to recognize from learning fool's mate early on. Once that f-pawn is moved, if there's no g-pawn that can block this, and these pieces have not yet moved, that's always going to be checkmate, even if the queen were still on her home square. And in this case, not a pawn, but a bishop was blocking the other getaway square. All right, the king is mated. I just noticed when this pawn moved here, it cut off a possible getaway square for the king. Our king, sitting here, cuts off these squares, and once our rook moves over, none of those squares are available to the king. So that's why that was a blunder, them moving their pawn forward, because they really needed that square. Okay, next puzzle. We do not have a check in this position, but we do have our queen under attack, protected by the queen. This one seems like it's a little higher rated, so I might not get the full number of points for this one. I know that we could just move out of the way with our queen, but we have to be careful where we move it. If we, for example, if we move it here, that opens us up to the knight fork here, which will, once we move our queen again, of course, it would win our rook for a knight. If we move it here, we will lose to the knight immediately. If we move it here, I guess they could trade queens with us at that point, but we're even on material. That would threaten the rook. I don't know if that's best. This is interesting. And just taking the rook I don't think is the answer, because when they take back, I don't think we have a follow-up. So, very interesting. Yeah, definitely don't want to drop back here. If we drop back here, it's the same kind of deal. They could just trade with us. So I might end up failing this one too. The only thing that I've noticed here is I could just take with this rook. I could capture the knight on e6. I think my throat's getting a little rough because I've been talking for a while. If I do that, they could capture back, but then I could capture back with my queen and be safe. And I would have gotten a rook and a knight for my rook. And if they don't capture back, they take my queen, for example, then I have checkmate back here. Actually, not checkmate, because they could block, but then I would capture their queen with my rook. So I am leaning toward that. I don't know if that's best. We're about to find out. That was best, and they did take my queen. Okay. Oh, and I was so slow on that I only got 6 points, which is all right. Okay, and we're getting close to 900, and we're getting close to 30 minutes. Let's see if we can break 900, and then I'll call it a day. Another interesting one. If we take the pawn protected by our queen, then they would just take back here. I am leaning toward taking the knight with our queen. because they could capture back, but if they do, then we will take their queen and we will have gotten an extra knight out of the deal. And I don't see anything else. I mean, we could take the knight with our rook, but then when they capture back, we're left here under threat from that rook, and we could take it, but they'll take back, and our rook won't be hitting their queen anymore. So I'm going to do this. Oh, it's just a one mover. Okay, and target time was 17 seconds. Oh my. Okay, well, we're in a 1,000 rated puzzle now, so I don't think it'll be a while before I get that in 17 seconds. Okay, keep going. Well, we could take back with check, or we could just checkmate them. This is one of those that I was talking about. Do not be tempted by what looks like a free piece or a really good exchange, because yes, they could have captured back. Knight for queen is a really good exchange, and I think in a game I would have been tempted by that unless I had been planning this for some time. So, got to look for the checks first, then the captures. Okay, they've blocked our check, but we do have a check here, and we have a check here. That one's better because it forces the king here and protects this square, I think. But if we check there, they're going to capture it. Interesting. Maybe that leads me back to this one. That also forces the king over, but then we can't check again. If I go here, they just take it, don't they? When the king goes over, I will have to back up and check. Oh, and that will be made. Okay. Okay, wow. And we've broken 900. Yeah, I almost went to the wrong place because I thought that, from there the knight would guard the h7 square. But if I had put the knight here, either one of the rooks could have captured it. So, all right. Well, we made a 500-point progress in one video, and hope you guys will stick with me. My next videos will start here, and I'll try to work my way back up to the 2,000 range. Thank you for watching, and we will see you next time.